The HOA Karen broke my 8-year-old daughter's arm with a baseball bat. She actually hit my little girl, just for playing in our own front yard. Karen thought she could hurt my family and get away with it without any consequences. But she didn't know one very important thing: I'm the county sheriff. Now she's going to pay dearly for what she did to my child. Before you hear this full story, please comment below and tell me which country you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe for more amazing true stories like this one. The summer heat was absolutely unbearable that Tuesday afternoon when my entire world changed forever in an instant. I was sitting at my desk in my office at the county sheriff's department, quietly reviewing case files and going through routine paperwork, when my personal cell phone suddenly rang. The caller ID showed my neighbor's number. I answered, expecting maybe a friendly chat or a quick question about the neighborhood. "Sheriff Mike, you need to come home right now." Mrs. Patterson's shaky, panicked voice came through the speaker. I could hear the fear in every word. "Something terrible has happened to Emma." My heart stopped beating for a moment. Emma was my precious 8-year-old daughter, the absolute light of my life, ever since my wife Sarah had passed away 3 years earlier from cancer. Emma was everything to me. She was all I had left of Sarah. I dropped everything on my desk immediately. I didn't even bother to tell anyone where I was going. I just ran to my patrol car and raced toward home as fast as I could safely drive. My sirens were wailing loudly through the usually quiet suburban streets of Willowbrook, warning other drivers to get out of my way. When I arrived at our street, Maple Street, I saw a large crowd of neighbors gathered around my front yard. My blood ran ice cold when I spotted the ambulance parked in front of my house with its lights flashing. I pushed through the crowd of people and found Emma lying on a stretcher. My heart absolutely shattered into a million pieces. Her small arm was bent at an unnatural, sickening angle that made my stomach turn. Tears were streaming down her face, leaving wet tracks on her cheeks. The scene before me felt completely surreal and dreamlike, like I was watching it happen to someone else from far away. My daughter, my precious Emu, was lying there in obvious pain because of another adult's deliberate actions. The protective instinct that every parent has suddenly exploded inside me with a force I'd never felt before in my entire life. "Daddy," she cried out when she saw me approaching. Her voice was filled with pain and fear. "It hurts so much. It hurts so bad." I immediately knelt down beside her stretcher. My hands were trembling uncontrollably as I gently brushed her hair back from her forehead. Her small face was red and blotchy from crying so hard. I could see the shock and confusion written all over her features. She was trying so hard to be brave for me, just like Sarah had always taught her to be before she passed away. "I'm here now, sweetheart. Daddy's here with you," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and steady, even though I was falling apart inside. "Can you tell me what happened to you?" "The mean lady with the clipboard hit me with a bat," Emma whispered through her sobs, her voice breaking. "I was just trying to get my ball from the grass. It rolled over there." She tried to point with her good arm toward a spot near the sidewalk, but the movement made her wince in pain. "I went to get it, and she started yelling at me really loud," Emma continued, her words coming out in broken fragments between sobs. "She said I was destroying the grass and making the neighborhood look bad. I told her I was sorry and that I'd be more careful next time, but she just got even angrier. Her face turned really red, Daddy, and she was shaking all over." Emma took a shaky breath before continuing. "She told me to get off the grass immediately, and I tried to move faster, Daddy. I really tried. But I guess I wasn't moving fast enough for her. That's when she went to her car and got something." Mrs. Patterson, our next-door neighbor, approached me quickly. Her kind face was filled with a mixture of anger and sympathy. She looked like she'd been crying too. "Mike, it was Karen Henderson from the HOA," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice shaking. "She went completely crazy over Emma simply playing in your front yard. She said the child was destroying property values and violating community standards." When Emma didn't move fast enough to satisfy her, Karen actually grabbed a baseball bat from her car trunk and she, double quotes, Mrs. Patterson couldn't finish her sentence. Her voice broke completely. I could see that Mrs. Patterson's hands were shaking badly. She had witnessed the whole terrible thing, and the trauma of what she'd seen was written all over her face. Mike, I've never seen anything like it in all my years living here, Mrs. Patterson continued, trying to compose herself. Karen was screaming about rules and regulations, about how children these days have no respect for property or authority. Emma was crying and trying to explain that she was just getting her ball, but Karen wouldn't listen to a word the poor child said. She raised that bat so high above her head. Mike, Mrs. Patterson's voice broke again as she continued, and Emma put her arm up to try to protect herself. That's when Karen brought that bat down with all her force. The sound of it hitting Emma's arm. Mike, I'll never, ever forget that horrible sound. And Emma's scream. It was the worst thing I've ever heard. Other neighbors started gathering around me, all wanting to share what they had seen and heard. Mr. Peterson, who lived across the street, said he'd been working in his garage when he heard all the commotion and came running. Mrs. Lee had been getting her mail from the mailbox and saw the whole thing unfold right in front of her. Young Tommy Harris, just 13 years old, had been riding his bike down the street and witnessed Karen's vicious attack. She just kept saying over and over that rules were rules, Tommy said, his young voice small and scared. Even after Emma fell down on the ground crying, Karen was just standing over her, saying that this was what happened when people didn't follow HOA rules. The paramedic, a young man I recognized from the hospital, looked at me with a grim expression on his face. "Sheriff, we need to get her to the hospital immediately," he said urgently. "From what I can see, it looks like a compound fracture. She's definitely going to need surgery to repair it properly." As the paramedics carefully loaded Emma into the back of the ambulance, I looked up and saw Karen Henderson standing calmly by her expensive white Mercedes, her arms crossed over her chest. She was looking annoyed and put out rather than remorseful or sorry for what she'd just done. Karen was a tall woman, somewhere in her 50s, with perfectly styled blonde hair that probably cost a fortune to maintain. She wore expensive designer clothes that screamed money and status. She'd been the HOA president for about 2 years now, and during that time, she had systematically made life absolutely miserable for everyone in our neighborhood. This wouldn't have happened if people just followed the rules properly. I heard her say loudly to another neighbor who was standing nearby, "Children shouldn't be playing unsupervised in common areas. It's a safety issue and a property value concern." Something dark and ice-cold settled deep in my chest. I was a sheriff, sworn by oath to uphold the law fairly and without bias. But I was also a father whose innocent child had been brutally attacked by a grown woman. Right then and there, standing in my front yard watching my daughter being loaded into an ambulance, I made a silent promise to myself that Karen Henderson would pay dearly for what she'd done to my little girl. At Willowbrook General Hospital, I sat anxiously in the waiting room for 3 long, agonizing hours while Emma underwent emergency surgery. The waiting was torture. Every minute felt like an hour. Every time a door opened, I jumped up, hoping for news. Dr. Martinez, the orthopedic surgeon, finally came out looking tired, but reassuring. He was still wearing his surgical scrubs and cap. "The surgery went very well, Sheriff Collins," Dr. Martinez said, sitting down beside me. "We've successfully set the bones with metal pins and plates. She needs extensive physical therapy over the coming months, but she should regain full use of her arm in time with proper treatment. However, she needs to be in a cast for at least 8 weeks, maybe longer, depending on how she heals." He paused, his expression becoming more serious. "But Sheriff, I need to be honest with you about something. The emotional trauma from something like this, it doesn't heal as quickly as broken bones. Children don't forget experiences like this easily. She's going to need counseling and a lot of support." When I was finally allowed to see Emma in her hospital recovery room, My heart broke all over again, into even smaller pieces. Her small arm was completely encased in a bright pink cast that seemed far too heavy for her tiny body to carry. She was awake, but still very groggy from the anesthesia medication. The hospital room smelled strongly of antiseptic and pain medication. Medical equipment beeped softly and rhythmically in the background, monitoring her vital signs. Emma looked so incredibly small in that big hospital bed, surrounded by all those machines and monitors. Her face was deathly pale, and there were dark circles under her eyes from exhaustion and trauma. I carefully pulled a chair close to her bedside and took her good hand in mine. It felt so tiny and fragile, like a small bird. For 3 years since Sarah died from cancer, it had been just the two of us against the entire world. I'd promised my wife on her deathbed that I would always protect our daughter, that I would keep her safe from any harm that might come her way, and I had failed her. I had failed both of them. "Daddy, why did that lady hurt me?" Emma asked, her voice small, confused, and heartbreaking. "I wasn't doing anything bad. I was just getting my ball, like I always do." I sat carefully on the edge of her bed, being extremely careful not to jostle or bump her injured arm. "Sometimes, sweetheart, there are people in this world who are very angry inside," I explained gently, "and they take that anger out on others who don't deserve it. But I promise you with everything I am, that lady will never, ever hurt you again. Will you arrest her, Daddy?" Emma asked, her eyes searching my face. "Yes, baby. I will make absolutely sure she faces justice for what she did." Emma's eyes started to close slowly as the medication pulled her back toward sleep. "Mommy would be so sad if she knew someone hurt me," she whispered. "Yes, she would be," I agreed, fighting back my own tears. "But she would also be incredibly proud of how brave you're being right now." "I miss Mommy," Emma said softly. "I miss her too, sweetheart. Every single day of my life." But even as I said those comforting words to my daughter, I knew deep in my heart that the legal system would likely give Karen Henderson nothing more than a slap on the wrist. Assault charges against children rarely resulted in serious consequences, especially when the attacker was a wealthy woman with money and connections to expensive lawyers. I'd seen it happen too many times before in my career as sheriff. That night, after Emma had finally fallen into a restless sleep, I sat in the uncomfortable hospital chair beside her bed and began making plans. Karen Henderson wanted to play dangerous games with my family. Fine, but she had absolutely no idea who she was really dealing with. Over the next several days, while Emma slowly recovered in the hospital and then at home, I began my own personal investigation into Karen Henderson's background and activities. What I discovered made my blood boil even hotter with rage. The first night after bringing Emma home from the hospital was absolutely the hardest night of my life. She woke up screaming 3 different times, crying hysterically about the mean lady coming back to hurt her again. Each time, I held her close and whispered reassurances, but inside I was burning with a rage I'd never experienced before. No child should ever have to feel this kind of fear while in their own home. The next morning I took Emma to her room and sat with her while she tried to eat breakfast using only her left hand. Everything had become a major struggle for her now. Simple tasks that she used to do without thinking, like holding a spoon, brushing her teeth, or combing her hair, had become enormous challenges that left her frustrated and crying. "I hate this stupid cast, Daddy," she said, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I can't do anything by myself anymore. I know it's hard, baby, but remember, it's only temporary." I tried to reassure her. "Your arm will heal, and eventually you'll be even stronger than you were before." "Will the mean lady come back?" she asked, fear evident in her voice. "No, sweetheart. I promise you with everything I am, she will never come anywhere near you again." That promise, that sacred vow I made to my daughter, fueled absolutely everything I did from that moment forward. Karen Henderson had not only physically hurt my daughter's body, but she had also stolen Emma's sense of safety and security. That was completely unforgivable in my eyes. I learned that Karen had moved to Willowbrook about 5 years ago after going through a messy divorce from a wealthy businessman. She'd used her divorce settlement to buy the largest, most expensive house in our HOA community. She'd immediately begun asserting control and dominance over the neighborhood. She'd been elected HOA president after running completely unopposed, mainly because nobody else wanted what they thought was a thankless, time-consuming job. But Karen didn't see it as thankless at all. She saw it as her own personal kingdom, where she could rule like a queen. I began quietly interviewing neighbors, always acting in my official capacity as sheriff, investigating the assault on my daughter. What I learned painted a disturbing picture of systematic abuse and harassment that had been going on for years. The elderly Mr. Johnson, a kind man who was a retired veteran, had been fined $500 for having his grass supposedly 2 inches too tall. While he was at home recovering from heart surgery, Karen had actually threatened to place a lien on his house when he couldn't pay the fine immediately, because he was on a fixed income. The Martinez family had been harassed for months and months over the color of their front door, which Karen had deemed not in compliance with community standards. But when I checked, their door color was clearly within the approved color palette listed in the original HOA. But young Mrs. Chen, a new mother with a 3-month-old baby, had been cited multiple times for having baby toys visible in her front window. Karen had called them unsightly and claimed they were detrimental to property values. The Henderson family, no relation whatsoever to Karen, had been forced to remove a beautiful memorial garden they had lovingly planted for their son, who had been killed in Afghanistan. Karen said it violated what she called landscaping harmony requirements. Every single story I heard made me angrier and angrier. This woman had been systematically terrorizing my neighbors for years, and now she had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed by physically attacking my daughter. But the most damning information came from my good friend, Detective Ray Morales, who worked in the white-collar crime division in the city. We met privately at a small diner on the outskirts of town, where no one would recognize us or overhear our conversation. Ray slid a thick manila folder across the table to me, glancing around carefully to make sure no one was watching or listening. "Mike, you didn't hear any of this from me," Ray said quietly over his coffee, his voice barely above a whisper. "But we've been watching Karen Henderson for several months now. She's been embezzling money from the HOA funds. We're talking about approximately $30,000 over the past 2 years. She's been using the money for personal expenses, spa treatments, expensive vacations, even payments on that fancy Mercedes she drives around." I opened the folder and carefully examined the contents. Inside were bank statements, receipts, and detailed transaction records. The evidence was absolutely damning and impossible to explain away. "Look at this particular transaction." Ray pointed to a specific entry with his finger. She charged a $5,000 luxury spa weekend to the HOA maintenance fund account. She claimed in the paperwork that it was for landscaping supplies. And here, he pointed to another entry, a $3,000 shopping spree at high-end stores, charged as security equipment for the neighborhood. My jaw clenched tight with anger. This woman had absolutely no moral compass whatsoever. "Can you arrest her for this?" I asked. "We're still building the case carefully," Ray explained. "These financial crimes take a lot of time to prosecute properly. It could be several months before we have enough solid evidence for the district attorney to feel comfortable moving forward with charges." I smiled grimly. "Months are far too long to wait. Emma has had nightmares every single night since the attack. She flinches whenever she hears any loud voices. Karen Henderson has traumatized my child, and she's going to pay much sooner than a few months from now." That weekend, I sat down at my laptop computer and began phase 1 of my carefully planned strategy. As county sheriff, I had access to resources and authority that Karen Henderson couldn't even begin to imagine. I knew exactly how to use that authority legally and properly. First, I formally requested a complete audit of all HOA finances, citing specific irregularities that had been brought to the attention of law enforcement. As sheriff, I had the legal authority to investigate potential crimes committed within my jurisdiction. Second, I initiated an official, formal investigation into Karen's brutal assault on Emma, making absolutely sure that every single detail was documented properly and by the book. I personally interviewed every witness who had seen what happened. I took dozens of photographs of Emma's injuries from every angle. I filed comprehensive detailed reports that left nothing to chance. Third, I began quietly reaching out to every single person Karen had harassed, threatened, or bullied over the past 2 years. I explained to each of them that as part of my official investigation, I was documenting a clear pattern of aggressive, threatening behavior. By the end of that first week, I had collected formal written statements from 17 different neighbors, all detailing Karen's systematic abuse of power and position. But the legal approach was just the beginning of my plan. Karen Henderson had made this deeply personal when she hurt my daughter with that baseball bat. It was time to return the favor in ways she would never see coming. On Monday morning, Karen received a certified letter from the county sheriff's office formally requesting all HOA financial records for the past 3 years. She also received official notice that her personal finances were being investigated as part of an ongoing criminal inquiry. I knew this would absolutely panic her, so I wasn't surprised at all when she called the sheriff's department that same afternoon, demanding to speak with me directly. "Sheriff Collins, this is absolutely outrageous and unacceptable." Her shrill, angry voice came through my office phone. "I'm being harassed and targeted because of a simple misunderstanding with your daughter." "Mrs. Henderson," I interrupted, my voice deliberately east-cold and professional. "Are you calling to confess to assaulting an 8-year-old child with a deadly weapon?" That's not it. Wasn't like that," she sputtered. "Because I have 17 separate witness statements that say otherwise," I continued calmly. "I also have detailed hospital records showing my daughter required emergency surgery due to injuries you deliberately inflicted on her." I paused for effect. "Now, you mentioned financial records in your message. When exactly can I expect those to be delivered to my office?" The phone line went completely quiet for a long moment. "I'll have my lawyer contact you," she finally said, her voice much quieter now. "That's certainly your legal right, Mrs. Henderson," I replied. "But please understand that the investigation will continue forward, regardless. Have a good day." After I hung up the phone, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. Karen was used to bullying people who couldn't fight back against her. She had absolutely no idea how to handle someone with real power and authority who wasn't afraid of her threats. That same evening, Karen's expensive lawyer, slick, well-dressed man, named Richard Blackwood, called my office. "Sheriff Collins, my client is willing to pay for your daughter's medical expenses in full in exchange for dropping this entire matter," he said smoothly. "Mr. Blackwood, your client committed aggravated assault on a minor child," I replied calmly. "The state will prosecute whether I personally want them to or not, but I do appreciate her generous offer to pay Emma's medical bills. We'll definitely consider that when we're calculating damages in our civil lawsuit against her." "Civil lawsuit?" His confident tone evaporated instantly. "Oh yes indeed," I said. "Assault, battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, child abuse, and endangerment. I'm thinking we'll start at about $500,000 in damages and see where we end up from there." The lawyer was silent for a moment. "Sheriff, perhaps we could discuss this through the proper legal channels." "Absolutely, Mr. Blackwood. Have yourself a good evening." I hung up and went to check on Emma, who was sitting at the kitchen table, coloring with her good hand. She looked up at me with her big brown eyes, so much like her mother's, and smiled. "Daddy, Mrs. Patterson brought me ice cream," she said happily. "Is the mean lady in trouble now?" "Yes, sweetheart. The mean lady is in a whole lot of trouble." By Wednesday of that week, word had spread like wildfire through the neighborhood about Karen's vicious attack on Emma and the subsequent criminal investigation. The community was finally seeing their HOA president's true nature. and they absolutely didn't like what they were discovering. I started receiving phone calls from neighbors I barely even knew. Mrs. Garcia from 3 houses down called to say she was praying for Emma every day. Mr. Thompson, who usually kept to himself, stopped by our house with a large basket of toys and books for Emma to enjoy during her recovery. "Sheriff, what that woman did was pure evil," Mr. Thompson said, his voice shaking with genuine anger. "My grandson is exactly the same age as Emma. If someone hurt him like that, I honestly don't know what I would do." The outpouring of support from our community was absolutely overwhelming in the best possible way. Emma received dozens of handmade cards and drawings from her classmates at school. She got a giant teddy bear from the local fire department. For the first time since Sarah had died 3 years ago, I felt like Emma and I weren't completely alone in this world. Mrs. Patterson took it upon herself to organize an emergency neighborhood meeting for Thursday evening. I didn't attend because it would have been inappropriate for me as the investigating officer, but Mrs. Patterson filled me in on everything afterward. Her eyes were practically glowing with satisfaction. "Mike, you should have been there to see it," she said excitedly. 23 families showed up, and every single one of them had a story about Karen's abuse and harassment. The Johnsons talked about the grass vines. The Martinez family shared how Karen made their teenage daughter cry over some chalk art on their driveway, and Mrs. Chen completely broke down talking about how Karen called her baby a disturbance to the peace. "What did everyone decide?" I asked. "Unanimous vote of no confidence in Karen Henderson? She's no longer HOA president as of tonight. We're also voting as a community to press harassment and abuse of power charges against her." This was turning out even better than I'd hoped. Karen wasn't just facing legal trouble from me. She was being completely ostracized and rejected by the very people she'd terrorized for years. But I still wasn't done with her. Not even close. Karen worked as a real estate agent for Premium Properties, one of the most prestigious and well-respected real estate firms in the entire county. Her business and income depended entirely on her reputation and connections in the community. On Friday, I paid a personal visit to her boss, Margaret Webb, the owner of Premium Properties. Margaret was a kind woman I'd known for years. "Sheriff Collins, what a nice surprise," Margaret said warmly. "How's little Emma doing? I heard about what happened." "She's healing, thank you for asking," I replied. "Actually, Margaret, I'm here on official business. I need to inform you that one of your agents, Karen Henderson, is currently under investigation for assault on a child, embezzlement, and systematic harassment." Margaret's face went deathly pale. Assault on a child. My God, what happened? I gave her the basic facts of the case, watching as her expression grew more and more horrified with each detail I shared. "Sheriff, I had absolutely no idea," Margaret said, clearly shaken. "Karen always seemed so professional and put together." "I'm sure she did," I agreed. "But I thought you should know that she's facing very serious criminal charges. The local media will probably pick up the story very soon, of course." "Thank you for telling me personally," Margaret said. "I'll need to discuss this with our legal team immediately." By Monday morning, Karen Henderson was no longer employed by Premium Properties. Word spread quickly through the tight-knit real estate community. In a business built entirely on trust and reputation, being fired for assaulting a child was absolute career suicide. 2 weeks after Emma's attack, the results of the HOA audit came back. Detective Ray Morales delivered them to me personally, along with an arrest warrant. "Mike, it's actually worse than we originally thought," Ray said, spreading documents across my desk. "She stole $47,000 over 3 years. She's been using HOA money for absolutely everything: her mortgage payments, car payments, luxury vacations, even plastic surgery." He pointed to the paper trail. "Look at this. She's been incredibly methodical about it, creating fake invoices from companies that don't even exist. She'd approve the fake payments herself as HOA president, then deposit the checks into her personal bank account. We've traced every single transaction. Enough for felony charges?" I asked. "Oh yeah," Ray confirmed. grand theft, embezzlement, fraud, and about 6 other charges we can stack on top. She's looking at 5 to 7 years in prison if convicted, maybe even more with the assault charges added on top. Ray leaned back in his chair. You know what the truly ironic part is? If she had just kept her head down and not attacked your daughter, we probably wouldn't have moved this fast on the embezzlement case. We would have taken our time building it. She literally brought all of this crashing down on herself. Karma, I said quietly. The most satisfying kind, Ray agreed with a grin. That afternoon, I had the genuine pleasure of personally serving Karen Henderson with her arrest warrant. She answered her front door in her bathrobe, her usually perfect hair a complete mess. She looked like she hadn't slept properly in days. Karen Henderson, you're under arrest for embezzlement, grand theft, and fraud, I said formally, reading her legal rights as I placed handcuffs on her wrists. This is harassment. She screamed at me. You're only doing this because of what happened with your daughter. Ma'am, this arrest is about you stealing money from your neighbors, I explained calmly. The assault charges are completely separate. As I led her in handcuffs to my patrol car, neighbors came out of their houses to watch. Some were openly smiling, others looked deeply satisfied, but not a single person looked sorry to see Karen Henderson being arrested. At the county jail, as I was processing her booking paperwork, Karen broke down completely and started sobbing. Sheriff, please, she begged desperately. I can pay all the money back. What happened with your daughter was a mistake. I was just having a really bad day, and she was in the wrong place, at the wrong time. I stopped what I was doing and looked at her directly, my eyes cold. Mrs. Henderson, you attacked an 8-year-old girl with a baseball bat because she was playing in her own front yard, I said slowly and clearly. That's not a mistake. That's who you are as a person. You don't understand the pressure I was under, she said desperately. The HOA, the neighbors constantly complaining, everyone expecting perfection from me. I just snapped under all that pressure. You snapped, I repeated, my voice dangerously low. My daughter needed emergency surgery. She has nightmares every single night. She's absolutely terrified to go outside and play now. You didn't just snap, Mrs. Henderson. You deliberately chose violence against a child who couldn't possibly defend herself. That's not pressure. That's evil. She started crying ugly, desperate sobs that shook her whole body. But I felt absolutely no sympathy for her whatsoever. I thought about Emma's nightmares. I thought about how she now flinched whenever she heard loud voices. I thought about all the nights I'd held her while she cried from the pain in her broken arm. My life is completely ruined, Karen whispered through her tears. You ruined it yourself, I replied, without emotion. The moment you decided that your petty power was more important than treating people, especially children, with basic human decency. And you know what? You ruined my daughter's childhood. She carried the physical and emotional scars of what you did for the rest of her entire life. I finished the booking paperwork in complete silence. Karen sat in the holding cell, with her head in her hands, finally facing the consequences of her terrible actions. Karen's assault trial was scheduled for September. Her embezzlement trial would follow in October. But before we got that far, something happened that surprised absolutely everyone. Emma told me she wanted to testify in court. Daddy, I want to tell the judge what the mean lady did to me, she said one evening, as I was helping her with her homework. Her cast had been replaced with a smaller one, but she still struggled to write with her dominant hand. Sweetheart, you don't have to do that, I told her gently. The grown-ups can handle this case without you. But I want the judge to know that she really hurt me, Emma insisted. And I want other kids to know it's okay to tell the truth when grown-ups hurt them. My brave little girl. She was only 8 years old, but she already understood justice and courage better than most adults I knew. The district attorney, Patricia Valdez, agreed to let Emma testify if she truly wanted to. We spent weeks carefully preparing her, making absolutely sure she understood what would happen in the courtroom and that she could change her mind at any time. On the day of the trial, Emma wore her favorite blue dress and held my hand tightly as we walked into the courthouse together. Karen was there with her expensive lawyer, looking pale and thin. She'd lost a noticeable amount of weight during the months since her arrest, and her usually perfect hair had grown out to show gray roots. When Emma took the witness stand, the entire courtroom fell completely silent. She spoke in her clear, high voice about playing in the yard, about trying to get her ball, about the scary lady with the clipboard who yelled at her. Then she went to her car and got a big stick, Emma said, her voice steady despite the tears forming in her eyes. She said I was a bad kid who didn't listen to rules. But I wasn't being bad. I was just getting my ball. What happened next, Emma? The prosecutor asked very gently. She hit me with the stick really hard, Emma said. It hurt so much that I fell down on the ground and couldn't get up. I was crying for my daddy, but he wasn't there to help me. I watched Karen's face during Emma's testimony. For the first time since this entire ordeal began, she actually looked genuinely ashamed. She was crying silently, her hands shaking in her lap. Emma continued bravely. My arm broke, and I had to have surgery at the hospital. I was really scared because my mommy died in the hospital, and I thought I might die there too. That broke my heart all over again. Emma had never told me she was afraid of dying during her surgery. The doctors fixed my arm, Emma concluded, but it still hurts sometimes. And I have bad dreams about the mean lady hurting me again. When Emma finished testifying, the defense attorney wisely chose not to cross-examine her. Even Karen's expensive lawyer wasn't heartless enough to attack an 8-year-old victim on the witness stand. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning with their verdict. Guilty on all counts: assault with a deadly weapon, child abuse, and aggravated battery. Karen Henderson was sentenced to 2 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 18 months. She would also be required to pay $200,000 in civil damages to cover Emma's medical expenses, ongoing therapy costs, and compensation for pain and suffering. Karen's embezzlement trial was almost anticlimactic after the emotional assault case. The financial evidence was completely overwhelming. She pleaded guilty and received an additional 3 years to run concurrently with her assault sentence. She would also have to pay back every single penny she'd stolen, plus interest and penalties. But the most satisfying part of all this wasn't the prison sentence or the financial restitution. It was watching our community come together and heal in the aftermath of Karen's reign of terror. With Karen gone, our neighborhood was completely transformed. The new HOA president was Mr. Johnson, the elderly veteran whom Karen had once harassed over his grass height. His first official act was to revise all of the ridiculous rules Karen had implemented over the years. At his first meeting as president, Mr. Johnson addressed the community with wisdom and kindness. "Folks, I've been thinking a lot about what kind of neighborhood we want to be," he said. Karen Henderson ruled through fear and intimidation. I think it's time we led with kindness and common sense instead. The vote to adopt new, reasonable guidelines was unanimous. Emma's arm healed completely, just as Dr. Martinez had predicted it would. The physical therapy was hard work, but she approached it with the same determination she'd shown during the trial. By Christmas, she was back to playing soccer and climbing trees. The nightmares took much longer to fade, but with the help of a wonderful therapist named Dr. Sarah Chen, Emma learned healthy ways to cope with her trauma. Emma is 10 years old now, and she still has a small scar on her arm from where the bone broke through her skin that terrible day. But she wears it like a badge of honor, proof that she survived something terrible and came out stronger on the other side. Our neighborhood is peaceful now, filled with families who genuinely look out for each other instead of tearing each other down. Children play freely,